Hi guys, so I have to say I'm starting to admire Sophy Ridge as an interviewer. She does a fantastic job. In this interview, she's talking to Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, and she holds him to account. She doesn't let him off the hook. They're talking here about test and trace. The interview becomes a disaster, a car crash. Not her fault, his fault, and you'll see why. So let's hear what they have to say.
We just heard from your colleague, Bernard Jenkin. He says that Dido Harding should effectively be sacked as the head of Test and Trace. Do you agree?
No, I'm afraid I don't agree. I think that what Dido has done is put together and drive forward a team that has come on so much in the last few months. We've got a scheme that's gone from having no test and trace, obviously before the virus, to building up a scheme now that means we've tested over 28 million people. That's more than anywhere else in Europe.
So Boris Johnson also does the same thing. Matt Hancock also does the same thing. We've tested more than anyone else in Europe. We're testing more than any parts of the world. They keep making these comparisons. These comparisons are irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you're testing more people than in the United States. What's important is it working? And it's not working. Even SAGE have said that it's not working. And SAGE are the scientific experts advising the government.
1.1 million people now who we've been contacted through the scheme. We want to see it improve, we want to see it grow and get better and better. That's how we fight this virus. But actually, I think Dido and the team have done a very good job to get to where we are.
So Dido Harding used to run TalkTalk. She was the CEO of TalkTalk, and it was a disaster there as well. And I've talked about Dido Harding as well, where Dido Harding was telling members of the public that they shouldn't get tested if they work in a workplace and another colleague is tests positive. I linked to that video later on.
Very good job. We spent £12 billion so far on Test and Trace. That's more than we spend on nurseries and universities in a year. And yet SAGE, the scientific advisors, say it's having a marginal impact on transmission. The chief scientific advisor says it's very clear there's room for improvement. I mean, it's not exactly a success, is it?
Fantastic. It's not really a success. You know, you've spent £12 billion on it and they said it's not fit for purpose.
But we agree, and the Prime Minister himself said this week, wants to see it improve, as I just said myself.
So it's not working very well. It needs to be improved. And his response is, yeah, it needs to be improved. Like as if that's a response, as if that's an answer to the criticism. It's like, you know, I failed the exam. I need to pass next time. Yeah, I need to pass next time. Just ignore the fact that I failed. I need to pass next time. See, everything's okay.
We want to see this develop and grow, but I also just would say, Sophie, be really careful around some of the figures. The 12 billion figure you just quoted is actually for the whole testing scheme. It's not just that tracking part of test and trace.
How do these people become ministers or secretaries of state? So he says, the 12 billion is for the test and trace, not just the trace and the test. So he said, basically saying, you know, the 12 billion is for the test and trace, not just the test and trace. Yes, but that's, you know, it's called test and trace. Nobody's just talking about the tracing part. We're talking about the test and trace. And he's saying something like, no, but it also includes the tracing part. Yes, we know that. Yeah, and it includes the testing part. Yeah, yes, we know that.
It's a bit misleading to suggest it's just that. It's much wider. And as I say, that is a scheme
in the name
that has now tested more here than anywhere else in Europe.
Once again, this more than anywhere else in Europe. That's irrelevant. Is it working? No, it's not.
It's test and trace, the clues in the name, testing and tracing. A submitted...
Owned. I love how she delivered it, you know, without breaking, you know, without smiling. I couldn't do that. The idea, like, it's in the name, test and trace. You spent 12 billion on test and trace. And he said, yeah, but it's not just the trace part, it's also the test. Yes, we know that.
of SAGE said in April that a successful
contact tracing is wrong.
System would require around 80% of contacts to be traced and isolated rapidly, i.e. within 2 days. So if that's what the level that it needs to be working effectively, successfully, when was the last time test and trace reached 80% of people's contacts?
Well, as the Prime Minister said this week, we want to see it improve. I would just say, Sophie, look...
He didn't answer the question, of course. When was the last time it reached 80%? Well, we want to see it improve. That's not an answer. That's a very bad answer, because it means, you know, if he said, actually, we haven't reached 80%, we arrived at 70% or 60% or maybe 50% or 30% or maybe 25%. You know, one thing is to say we've arrived at, you know, somewhere near our target. Another is to ignore the question altogether, which he's doing, which is a very bad sign.
Quite right, that cost is around test and trace, but it's wrong to suggest it's the cost of contact tracing. It's not. It's the whole programme of work that, as I say, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest now in Europe. We do want to see it improve.
But that wasn't her point. Her point was you spent 12 billion on test and trace, and it's not working. The testing part hasn't been working, and the tracing part hasn't been working. He's trying to ignore the testing part and say, yeah, well, the tracing part is, you know, it's a work in progress. No, the question was about the whole lot.
That's why we're putting more support in to ensure that we've got more robotics, more people, more laboratory capacity to see it get to the level we want it to be. Ultimately, we will beat this virus, but all of us with our self-responsibility, particularly if we've tested positive, making sure that we isolate in the way that the guidance outlines.
Why do they continually send out people who have no competence in the field? Like, why isn't Matt Hancock defending this? Like, Matt Hancock seems to be quite happy to go on Sky News, but recently he's been avoiding Sky News. He's been avoiding the media in general. He's been in Parliament, but he stopped giving interviews. Why is that?
So the question I asked was, when was the last time that test and trace reached 80% of contacts? It didn't reach 80% of contacts since the 17th of June. It's been falling since then. It hit a new...
Why is that?
New low of just 59% of contacts in the most recent weeks. I mean, on Sage's own definition, that is not a successful test and trace system, is it?
Well, as I say, and as the Prime Minister said, we want to see it improve. Of course, we are testing more and more people, some 360,000 test capacity, 340,000.
Why are they not capable of saying, yes, we didn't reach our target, we failed, we need to do better? They're incapable of actually saying, yes, we failed. It's all about, okay, but we're testing more people, we're testing more than Europe. Instead of actually answering the question with some honesty, this is part of the problem. This creates distrust between government and citizens. Because if a politician came out and said, look, I'm sorry, we failed, but now we want to fix it, I think people would actually trust them more than always this, yes, we're doing better, we have a world-beating system, everything is going really well, we're testing more than any other country, we're counting, we're not counting PPE as in individual gloves, we're not doing any of this. Everything is always getting better, but people see that it's failing. At least be a little bit honest with the public. I honestly believe that if the government was a bit more honest, they would have more people on their side. They're incapable of telling the truth, and they're undermining their own efforts.
1,000 tests completed on the last day's figures, getting to 500,000 by the end of this month. So that's been growing exponentially. We want to see the other part of the system catching up so it can get back to doing that 80%. That's why we want to see that system improve, as we've outlined ourselves just this week.
I understand why the government is keen to emphasise the number of tests that we're carrying out. And as you say, compared to lots of European countries, we are carrying out an awful lot of tests. But that only matters if people get the results back in a timely way. And actually, if you look at the latest statistics, the most recent week, just 15% of in-person tests were received within 24 hours. I mean, it's no point testing all these people if they're then just wandering around for 48 hours spreading the virus.
Well, actually, I disagree with you there. I think, first of all, it is important that we test people. That's why I think it's right that we are...
Oh, my God. I disagree with you. I think it's important that we test people. She didn't say that. Why are you putting words in her mouth? She didn't say, I don't think it's important that we test people. She said it's important that, like, what's the point in testing people and if they have to wait for days and days for results and they're able to walk around and infect people? They need to have the results as soon as possible. If you don't have the capacity, you need to extend capacity.
Are clear about the fact we're testing more than anywhere else.
See, the problem, and once again, we're testing more than any other. That's irrelevant. Jesus. The problem is that you've outsourced the work to companies who are incapable of doing it. And why did you outsource the work to these companies that are incapable of doing it? Because they're donors to the party or they're friends of politicians. Why is Serco continually getting all these contracts when Serco is incapable of doing any bloody job right? Wouldn't you think that if a company failed years ago to, arrive at the standards required by the government, that company would be blacklisted? But Serco has never been blacklisted, even though it has made a disaster when it comes to any type of contract it's touched.
In Europe, when people get the result of their test, whether it's within a day or less, or occasionally, sadly, taking that 48 hours, that's when people need to, once they're clear they've got symptoms, people should be isolating anyway. If somebody's had a test and then proves positive, they should be isolating following the guidance. That's what we've all got. But
if somebody has symptoms and they self-isolate with symptoms, they're not going to be covered. People can't, like, if somebody has symptoms and they call up their boss and say, look, I think I have symptoms, the boss will say, have you had a test? Yes, I've had a test, but I don't have the results yet. Well, you still need to come to work.
Do in terms of our own self-responsibility. So increasing the testing is hugely important. What we also want to see, as I say, as we've outlined this week, is an improvement in the other part of the system, seeing that contact work increase, the speed of the testing results come through more quickly. And that's...
You could actually, see, this recording is from the 25th of October. You could actually take this recording and go back about 3 or 4 months, and what he's saying would be exactly the same. We want to increase testing. We want to increase tracing. We want to increase. Everything is about what we want in the future. He's not talking about what's happening now. Everything is what we're going to do in the future. People are concerned about now.
That's why we're looking to increase the capacity on that side with more laboratory capacity as well.
My colleague Ed Conway recently revealed that the government is paying multi-million pound wages for people to work on the test and trace system. So executives from Boston Consulting Group paid day rates of about £7,000. That's equivalent to an annual salary of 1.5 million. And this is a system that, in your own words, needs improvement, that you'd like to see improvement. Is that really value for money?
Well, we've had to work I think it's quite right that the government's been working across the public sector and with the private sector as well, trying to bring the very best expertise to a virus that, as you said...
The very best expertise, like Serco. Yes, the consulting company are different, but at the end, who's doing the testing and tracing?
Said at the beginning, Sophie, is a new virus. This is unprecedented. We're all learning more and more as we go forward. We're looking to improve and develop the way we respond to that virus as we move forward. That's why things have been able to change in a positive way as well since we first...
Once again, he's not answering the question. The question was, why are these people earning so much money? How can you justify spending this amount of money on these people? And he's basically saying, well, because they're experts and nobody knows anything about the virus and blah, blah, blah. And, we're doing much more and, we're testing more than anyone else in Europe.
We're dealing with this and had that full lockdown back in February and March earlier this year. I think it is right that we work across the private sector in partnership with the public sector to see the inroads we're seeing and the work.
Why do you think that the government is so adamant about working with the private sector, even though many companies in the private sector are incapable of doing the job? I've said it before. The reason is because they want to eventually outsource everything to the private sector. They want to sell off the NHS. That's what it's about. Unfortunately for them, these companies are not, doing a very good job. If they were doing a better job, it would be easier for the government to sell the idea of selling off the NHS. But these companies are not coming up to the standard necessary. So it's more difficult to sell off the NHS this way. Not that they won't try and they won't do it, but it would be much easier if companies like Serco were actually up to standard.
Because you touched on a few moments ago with Bernard around the vaccine as well. That's coming through because of that partnership between the public and the private sector.
I just want to...
Once again, I really want to emphasize this point. This is a trial run for selling off the NHS. Getting private companies involved, even if those companies are incompetent, and then trying to sell the idea that, look, we have defeated this virus thanks also to the private sector. Now let's make it easier to sell off parts of the NHS to the private sector. The NHS will not be sold off in one block. It's going to be eaten away by the private sector. Eventually, in a few years' time, people are going to imagine it as always been part of the private sector. People won't remember when the NHS was in public hands. That's how it's going to be. It's not going to be one day you wake up and everything is different. Every day it's going to gradually change.
Ask you about some reports that are in the newspapers today. Reports that the government is looking at cutting the 14-day isolation period if someone in your household has got COVID or if you're travelling from abroad to 10 days, potentially even 7 days. Is that true?
Well, we're looking at the moment, the teams are looking at what we can do around those isolation periods. This will be scientifically led. As I say, we're learning more about the virus.
No, it won't be scientifically led. This is about trying to save the economy. This is not following the science. The scientists would not be saying, yes, you can reduce the quarantine period. This is all about trying to save the economy. What the government have been doing from the beginning is, okay, we need to follow some of the science, because if we don't, we're going to have an absolute disaster. But we also have to try and keep businesses open because, many business owners vote for the Conservative Party, donate to the Conservative Party. If they feel that they're being thrown under a bus, they're not going to support us either through votes or through money in the future. So let's try and open as many businesses as possible. That's why they're doing this 3-tier system, which is an absolute disaster. Okay, which businesses can we close? Which businesses in which areas can we close? Let's try and do a sort of balance, a mosaic approach to this, which is not working. It's having a very limited effect on the pandemic and its spread. This is business driven. It's not scientifically driven.
Virus every single day. It's still a relatively new virus in terms of disease, and as we learn and the scientists are able to gauge this, we can look at whether we're able to reassess that. We're not ready to make a final decision or announcement on that yet, but we want to make sure we're moving with the science, and indeed,
once again, you're not moving with the science. Why did SAGE say that a tier 3 lockdown is not sufficient to reduce the spread? If you were following the science, they would say you would need to do a full lockdown. You're not going to do that. Now, I can understand the arguments against a lockdown, but they're economic. They're not scientific. And I understand the idea that, look, if we go into a lockdown again, it's going to be extremely damaging to the economy. And I understand that too. But this half-arsed approach is going to be more expensive in the long term, not cheaper.
Allowing people to live and work within this virus as best as we can, whilst always making sure we protect people's health and the NHS.
Is it not just about the science, though? Is it also about the fact that you're worried people are just not following the rules?
No, this is going to be scientifically led. We've always said we want to make sure we get the balance right. We want to protect lives, protect our NHS, ensure that it can continue to deal with the issues that it has,
as well,
as it will have through the winter, but also making sure that our economy can continue to develop and grow, and that people can, as far as we possibly can within the constraints of the safety we have to follow with this virus, live as close to a normal life as we can as we get forward to a point where we can go back to living a normal life. That does mean
we're not going to get back to living a normal life. Not until we have a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine yet. This idea that we're working towards some sort of normality, even though we don't have a vaccine, is just useless talk. And it creates a type of hope in people's minds that, okay, if we have these half measures, maybe we can struggle along until we get to a stage where we have a vaccine and then everything will be okay. I'm sorry, that's not going to be how it is. Even with a vaccine, we're still going to have some sort of restrictions in place, because it takes years, months, years to get the vaccine rolled out. It takes, there's a possibility of mutations, so you'll need new vaccines, you need rolling vaccines. I want people to understand that it's not a silver bullet here. And unfortunately, I think politicians are trying to play it up as one. Let's struggle along until we have a vaccine. No, we need to have a lockdown. I'm sorry to say this, and I know I get a lot of criticism for this, but you need to have a lockdown, another one, if necessary, for whatever length of time is necessary to get the numbers down. And then while you're having your lockdown, you develop the test and trace system. Because the problem with the test and trace system in the UK at the moment, the reason it's not working is because you have too many cases. It's impossible to trace all of them. When you have smaller numbers of cases, it's much easier to track, to test and trace. Then you're able to identify where those people are. You test the people who come in contact with the original case. You isolate those people. Isolate them not in their homes, but in a specific hospital. That's what you need to do. That's what they did in South Korea. And that's why South Korea is having much fewer cases.
But while we've got this virus, and as we are putting those guidance points in place, that we all follow the guidance to the best of our ability to ensure.
Asking people to follow the guidance is not enough. You need to have the mechanisms in place. And I've been saying this on this channel for the last number of months now. The approach from the government is to do a half-arse measure and then blame the public if things don't work out. They have to take responsibility. They're happy to blame the public and say the public didn't follow the rules. People are breaking the rules. People have failed. Not everyone, but a lot of people have failed. They have to take responsibility also for their failures. But because they're the Conservative Party, they will not take any responsibility. It's always someone else's fault. Whether it's Brexit, whether it's pandemic, whether it's children going hungry, it's always someone else's fault. Never their fault. They'll never apologize. And because they don't see it as their fault, they'll never fix the problem. We're just going to limp from one crisis to the next because they're incapable of actually any type of introspective thinking and say, have we done something wrong? Is there something we can fix that we have done wrong? They are incapable of that. And this pandemic is not going to be dealt with correctly because of that way of thinking. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?